Welcome everybody to Men of Steel commentary, the film. We are starting with a Time Warner Company WB logo, and this kind of bone structure or metal structure seems made up of Kryptonian writing in the background. It kind of reminds me of the intro to 1989's Batman by Tim Burton, when you kind of see some darkness and some stone structures and things like that, that reveals the Batman logo. This one over here has Kryptonian hieroglyphs and writing. It's very interesting. And we get to see, all the usual logos, Copy, DC Comics, and all the previous producers. It is interesting to notice that it is a very, dark introduction to the DC extended universe. It is of no coincidence, of course, that we begin the film with the birth of a child. We are giving birth not only to another Superman franchise in film, but also a whole franchise of superheroes. Interesting to know, Russell Crowe doing the role of Jor-El that Marlon Brando certainly did for the original trilogy, and also for Bryan Singer's Superman Returns. It is very, very interesting that in this particular scene, we have only two people, witnessing the birth of, Kal-El. Something very, normal that occurs here on Earth. Babies are born on Earth all the time. Over here, there's a Lion King essence to it, and later on, we're told that it is the first natural birth. In Krypton, we get to see the spaceships and the surface of Krypton. The council looks a little bit different than the other film versions. I really like the costumes here. They seem to be very organic, and in the behind the scenes, the production designers and the costume designers explain that these sigils or emblems in their chests represents various families or houses of Krypton, things that have existed for hundreds if not thousands of millions or even millions. We don't know how old the civilization is at this point. We just know that it's decaying. Great way to make an entrance over here. It is kind of a shaky cam, but if you notice, the shaky cam subdues when important things happen, like this entrance of Sod, in a full armored regalia. So while people say that the movie was very shaky, the shaky cam only happens when there's a little bit of action. Not to mention that it stays heavily focused on the characters' faces. You cut from mid shots to close-ups where it needs to be. So the cinematography here, it's top notch. One of the things that I was really impressed in my first viewing was that Zod's many armored costumes were digital. It became kind of seamless in the way the film is, shot originally without the costumes, and then the digital costumes added later. Over here, we start having the main themes of the film, which are, obviously totalitarianism versus freedom. We have a general who was bred to follow orders versus a scientist who, if you look at the definition of science, it's to know. So, the freedom to know, it's kind of the essence of being a scientist. You need to be free to explore. And some people wonder how, Jor-El knew how to do combat and use weapons. It's like, well, as a scientist, you are required to know, so he must have studied things that were not intended for scientists, like armed combat and things like that. So we can already tell he was breaking the rules from the get-go. cut to this amazing epic shot of him running outside, seeing all the destruction going on. That's how I felt when I was reading the reviews for, this film. I don't know what critics were thinking. I saw like my awesome little world coming to an end, because apparently the reviews seem to matter for some people, but we'll get to that more on that later. We see this amazing four-winged creature, and we cut through some very, very epic chase sequences. It's interesting to know that the surface of Krypton looks very scarred, and they have actually dug all the way deep into, below ground. That's kind of a symbol of a barren planet, the planet that is dying, where they're keeping this skull, kind of was shaped like a tree. I don't know if you guys noticed that. Kind of great symbolism, tree of life, as it were. And behind the scenes, this was kind of interesting to notice that, Russell Crowe was already on, okay shape, but he was definitely getting older. So he had to do a lot of exercise for the swimming. You see this Genesis chamber. It might be reminiscent of the Matrix for some of you younger kids, but it kind of ties into John Byrne's run of Man of Steel in the late 80s, early 90s. Here's the codex. It kind of reminds me of the skull from our human ancestors, the Lucy skull, one of the first, bipedal sapiens to, exist in Africa. Very, very interesting. I don't know if they meant to do that, but it's a very powerful scene nonetheless. The skull also symbolizes death, so embracing death, while you travel through the underworld, which is, the water in this chamber. It's kind of a symbolic, also taking a dive of confidence, It's a very powerful storytelling. There's a lot of heavy symbolism among the, the action sequences, which some people who don't know anything about symbolism, they just go, well, it just looks cool. But, two ships colliding into each other. I was like, whoa, that's some Star Wars epicness right there. So yeah, we have a lot of symbolism. For instance, we have giant spaceships that are somewhat organic, and then we have Jor-El riding on the back of a, living creature. So you have the juxtaposition of, machinery and the ancient world. As of this recording, there will be a Sci-Fi Channel Krypton series that will tie into this film. I'm doing this commentary on the eve of the release of Wonder Woman on disc, because it's another origin story that I will be touching upon. Speaking of Wonder Woman, we have we have the two scientists here, which are pretty damn equal. There is no gender superiority here. They're both equally impressive as scientists. Lara over here explains, how will they kill him? And Jor-El says, hey, he'll be a god to them, which is kind of interesting because that's what happens in the sequel. Superman is seen as a messiah figure, and they discover a way to hurt him through kryptonite. This soundtrack is really awesome. I will touch upon more on that later, but I just want to say that the actors here are giving really emotional performances. They're being somber, but yet hopeful at the same time. Hopeful that this crazy plan of sending a child adrift will result in something meaningful. Obviously, Moses comes to mind, but if you're a lover of history, you would realize that the story of Sargon also kind of follows that, and I think that was before Moses. So yeah, the motif of putting a baby in the basket is something that was in the Middle East way before the Bible, and it is kind of impactful. because by choosing this, you're appealing to the three largest religions in the world. So obviously, the whole motif of him being an icon, it's kind of relevant. But if you don't know any of these things, you're probably kind of like, what? Interesting thing to notice that the codex is embedded into the cells. This was featured on, I believe, Superman Earth 1 very, very recently, where there was some kind of information embedded into the cells. Of course, the most recent sci-fi movie to do this was Prometheus by Ridley Scott, resulting in some really dark and ominous, aliens building the Earth thousands of years ago theories. Over here we have a much more positive outlook of, baby Kal-El coming to not doom humanity, but, to help us out. I really like the design of the ship. It looks alien, yet familiar to us. With the closing, we have the amazing S shield. I really enjoyed, these amazing shots of the ships and Jor-El putting on the armor. If I have some money, I will buy that statue because it's amazing. I really enjoy how Zod is traveling on these things that kind of remind you of Vietnam era helicopters, where you're just kind of hanging out outside the door, of the ship. Again, cinematography is amazing. I'm viewing this on a 4K television. I'm actually standing up because I'm really pumped. This film is very underrated by many. Here we have Feora, kind of a second in command, imposing on her own right. I mean, she is tremendously awesome. Amazing shot of Jor-El, walking through the mist. And I believe those two costumes by Jor-El and Zod were digitally added later on. I was very surprised because these costumes look really amazing. Here we have the confession of Jor-El of having a natural, born child, which is kind of a heresy in the, in the culture of this Krypton. A very amazing performance here by Michael Shannon. Michael Shannon definitely, I wouldn't say he steals this movie, but every scene he's in, same thing with Russell Crowe, they just command such energy and acting, giant acting chops for both of them. We have Lara trying to get the spaceship going. We see this amazing cut, on Zod's face, which will still remain later in the film. Great combat by both of them. Obviously, Gladiator comes to mind, and we kind of get a hint of the red cape from the House of El. I think it's a little bit more burgundy on this version. So you have burgundy and yellow bone armor and blue. So you do have the colors, red, red, blue, and yellow of, Superman. I don't think a lot of people kind of picked up on that, but it's there. Here we have the choice of clicking the button for ignition. And this is when Zod kind of loses it, both parents are looking up hopeful, and Zod is just screams, there's some sharp object, and stabs Jor-El. This is what happens in the future movies when, I don't know if you're watching this, prior to seeing Batman vs. Superman, but there's a very similar motif when Superman fights Doomsday in this very scene of, Jor-El fighting Zod. So I will be, referencing those future movies. I'll try not to spoil it, but I will point out some things here and there. Obviously, I'm not going to give out the ending to Batman vs. Superman, but I will say, this thing ties into that thing. no major plot points, but definitely some of them. And obviously here we have a very resilient woman who's not going to bow down to Zod's interrogations or any kind of coercion by Zod. Having Zod order the ship destroyed, and at the last minute having like the Krypton police show up, it's kind of a big deal. It kind of shows you that the humanity or compassion, as it were, of the Kryptonians helped save Kal-El in a way which wasn't in other versions in film. I love this look of Michael Shannon as Zod. I think this transition of light really kind of drives the point further that the cinematography here is amazing. Zack Snyder tends to do a lot of the storyboards himself. He offers some story elements, but the writers tend to do the actual footwork. Over here we have this amazing bit of dialogue, Michael Shannon even spitting on the council. He's very ravenous, he is definitely pissed off, and you can kind of understand his position. He is bred for this purpose, and this is the only logical outcome. It kind of is a commentary on narrow-mindedness, and there is a lot of military leaders to become politicians and rulers of nations. Often it goes well, often it doesn't. And this line of "I will find him," it's a kind of a reminiscent of "He will bow down before me." I happen to think both are equally as epic. There might be some kind of anti-Americanism by choosing the British guy. Also nostalgia. Kind of plays into the role of preferring the older versions of Superman after this. But for anybody who's read the comic books, especially the John Byrne of the late 80s, early 90s, you would, recognize a lot of elements of newer Superman, more recent. I like to say new, but, the 80s is, it's almost 30 years old. I'm a child of the 80s, and I'm very old. So anyways, we have the Phantom Zone in a very awesome triangular shape. This kind of reminds me of, like Mass Effect series, the video game series. But it's very, very science fiction oriented. I happen to love that because prior to Superman, there were no superheroes. It was all, science fiction comics, cowboy comics, urban crime comics like The Shadow and things like that. So the fact that this is, the Superman is the first hero, it's kind of amazing. I also like the fact that they save this particular costume in a vault while the, eruptions are happening. And this is a very beautiful piece of music. I believe a violin of hundreds of years old was used for this by Hans Zimmer. And it goes to show you the kind of level of old world quality. I love this scene. I'm watching, obviously, the movie in silent, but, just watching this amazing actress, kind of look up in the sky and hope that her son will be okay. It's very powerful. I am always moved watching this scene, the sacrifice of parents that they do for us. You have the sacrifice of, Krypton because it refused to, do anything about it. You don't see a very, epic, explosion. It was more like a planet dying explosion. Nothing really, wow, look at that. It was more like somber and stuff. The wow, look at that happens as soon as the ship, is getting into our solar system. You see like the music picking up, right away. There's this wonderful shot of the Earth and the moon, and it's starting to land. It breaks orbit and then it lands. This background palette that's coming up right here totally reminds me of Donner's Superman. It's almost like somebody took a plate of Kansas, like a film plate of Kansas, and superimposed CG and a blue filter. It looks amazing either way, but it struck me as like a homage to Donner's Superman. Over here we have Sailor, being called Greenhorn, and obviously, Kal-El is kind of impervious to his surroundings, so he's still very green. I mean, he knows that Cage is not going to do anything to him, but he wasn't aware that somebody would jump in and save him. So it's kind of showing you like how he's trying to get his footing on being the best possible person or being to help humanity. Going into the ocean to find yourself. It's a motif used in many literary works. Old Man and the Sea comes to mind. There's also, many Greek poems that talk about the ocean and things like that. This shot of the door being, ruptured and just yanked away by Superman, it's pretty damn impressive. And the first time I saw this in the movie theaters, when Henry Cavill first shows up without a shirt, all the ladies went pretty crazy. I can tell you that as a man, this version of Kal-El, with the burned pants and shirtless and all beefy, it's a very difficult cosplay to pull off. We also know that he has a pendant. We later on see what the pendant is. And, he's more aware when he's being himself. He's obviously has his powers out in the open, so he notices that the thing is collapsing. And he's trying to help out the people in the helicopter. And for anybody that says, oh my god, Superman didn't save anybody, there is a channel called Men of Steel Answers, a YouTube channel by fans, for fans, to kind of share to anybody who has any kind of gripes with this film. I recommend that you see it after this in case you still have any questions regarding this film. Around the time this film was released, there was an accident, I believe, in the Gulf that involved an oil refinery. So this kind of touched home. It might not be a big deal for moviegoers who are impervious to the news, but to many people in the United States who were affected by this, it was kind of resonated. Also, when there's a scene with a tornado. It also reminded people of tornado things that happened in the Midwest when this film was released. Over here we have a homage to some horror movies, because you kind of see like the internal organs and tissues of all the humans. It's like obey. It's a nice horror movie reference in case you want to catch it. Heightened awareness is not very nice. This poor child is intaking a lot of extra sensory, overload. If you've ever been in a hungover and someone's being really loud when you wake up, you will notice that it is not something pleasant. So you can imagine what this poor kid's going through. If you ever had a hangover, you know what this is about. Also, if you wake up without coffee, like myself, oh man, any kind of extra, sensory stimuli is definitely not good. This beautiful, in exchange between Martha and, young Clark is, it's gonna put things to come. If you think you can't change the world is too big, focus on something small. Perhaps help your fellow human being, recycle, help people who you can in your everyday life. Shop local, donate to your local firefighters and, police and blood drive. Start small. If you think the world's too big, start small. and that's kind of it's a beautiful message that a lot of people tend to miss. And I like the juxtaposition of modern day life and flashbacks. A lot of people seem to be not happy with this, but it's a very simple storytelling technique. I can't believe that 90s kids who grew up with Pulp Fiction can handle this kind of simple flashback storytelling. Maybe it's because Zack Snyder did it and people hate Zack Snyder for whatever reason. But if Quentin Tarantino can make a convoluted carbon copy of David Mamet's movie, then whatever. This is an amazing shot of shirtless Henry Cavill, who looked like a giant bear, just massive. Yeah, that's all I can say about this scene. It's like, interestingly enough, Henry Cavill didn't use any kind of steroids for beefing up for Superman. So yeah, it's a pretty damn accomplishment to be that beefy. Inspiration to everybody. For those of you that want to know, the film in question by Robert Altman was Shortcuts, released in 1993, before Pulp Fiction. Anyways, we cut to the bus when young Clark is a little bit older than previously shown. So we're showing progression in his life. We see Lana Lang and a bully depiction of Pete Ross. Him going over the ledge over here in the bus. It kind of reminds me of the pilot for the TV show Smallville, which ran for about 10 seasons on the CW, which I am a fan of. I mean, one of the things that you're going to realize is that there are several types of fans. There are people who are fans of Superman, which includes, video games, animation, films, live action, TV shows, radio shows, etc. And there are fans of Superman who only saw the Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve films, which is fine, but if you're someone like me who loves everything Superman, there is no definitive Superman. I have made an entire podcast, which I will link to for this particular reason, but this little short homage to Smallville by having a vehicle going over the bridge, it's kind of very, very interesting. Also, the first thing that we see in the first cover of Action Comics #1 is Superman lifting a vehicle, which, by the way, go ahead and read Action Comics #1. You can purchase a digital copy on the DC comic book app. Over here, we have concerned parents saying that this isn't the first time young Clark Kent has been seen doing these kind of things. This mother thinks it's some kind of providence, some kind of miracle. We have Diane Lane with a Christian cross, very Midwestern attitude. You can tell that these people are religious but not zealots. They're not overly religious. So the fact that their kid is from another world and has these superpowers, they understand the heavy consequences. Any single time when someone who's very young and naive has any kind of power, the powers that be tend to come in and sweep and disrupt them. One of the things that Jonathan Kent says here is that maybe the answer is we don't know. Young Clark goes, what was I supposed to do, let him die? And Jonathan's, maybe, I don't know. There is no right answer. If by saving people from the bus, the government comes and takes young Clark, and then the wrong person gets elected, young Clark will be turned into a killing machine by the military and the powers that be. It's very, very easy to see the line of thought. So obviously, Jonathan wants Clark to grow up normal, have a normal, life, because when Clark finds himself as an adult and knows what kind of man he wants to be, for better or worse, that person will change the world, which is kind of a, if you have a gifted child, or even just your child, you will know that, they're going to contribute to the world one way or another. If your child is good at basketball, you definitely want to be able to protect, your kid from exploitation. So it's a very basic human emotion. I don't know why people have any concerns about this. It's a very, very logical thing to do to shield your son or daughter away from the harms of the world until they're ready to make the decision for themselves. It's interesting to notice that over here we have newspaper clippings of, extraterrestrial and anything and important that, Jonathan has collected over the years. It's not like a conspiracy theory wall, but it's very, it's very rural America, rural Americana, collecting newspapers. Also kind of informs you that this is how young Clark will come to be a reporter. It's like, obviously, his parents collected these kind of newspaper sources. So, it is only obvious that he's going to pursue something like that because he's seen what has done for his parents in shaping the worldview. Jonathan Kent, here's "You Are My Son," obviously, represents a much, human approach to it. Yeah, it's like, you might be from another planet, but you're still my son. When parents are confronted with something that their kids are other than quote unquote normal, this film, it's kind of emotional because, well, you are my son after all. So very, very amazing scenes. It is also very interesting to know that this is the the first Superman origin story in over about 35 years, so some things had to be updated. Over here, Clark hears these military people talking about an incident up north. This is where he gets the idea to travel up north. But he's also more aware of his surroundings in the form that he's paying attention to this man being misogynistic and assaulting a female coworker. This scene kind of reminds me of the scene in Superman 2 where Clark Kent is depowered. Him and Lois go to a diner and a similar situation happens where Clark has the living snot beat out of him because he has no powers. Now, in that film, once Superman has his powers back, he comes back and humiliates the bully. Which, in this version, there is no harm done to the actual human, no matter how much of a douche the human tends to be. We have a much more sophisticated and restrained Kal-El and, not yet Superman. So instead of actually going back to the diner and beating him up, saying, "Oh yeah, I've been working out, here's some money for the damages," this Clark destroys this douche's truck, which, it's amazing. You gotta teach that person a lesson. We have a hitchhiking shot, which is really kind of nice. And we know that he's going up north. We just don't know where. And then we see some guy called Joe over here, which kind of looks a lot like Clark. And we are introduced to Lois. And who's the first person that greets her? It's Lois. Lois and Clark, together with the first introduction. It's kind of it's very, very subtle, but we can already see that their fates are intermingled. already, Lois has said, to be a great journalist, and that, she's kind of a big deal. They even have somebody carry her bags for her, kind of like a celebrity, but not a bad celebrity, more like a humble celebrity, someone who knows how to write a good paper, and getting some awards and recognition in the process. So this is the event that those two military people in the pub were talking about. As you can see, Hardy, Colonel Hardy has reluctance to help out Lois Lane, and she states that the U.S. military was blocking her involvement, which is kind of telling. There's a lot of things that the military decides is best not for civilians to know. And when it comes to any kind of significant discovery with alien technology, the military would be the first on the scene. I believe this actor was also in Smallville. I believe the later seasons, I want to say 9 and 10, helping out Chloe with the Watchtower. Anyways, so we're continuing the drama over here. Clearly, establishing that the outside temperature tends to drop as soon as the sun goes out. The quarters that she's given are basically kind of very basic, not very accommodating, but never mind, she's kind of used to it. Her main concern is getting the story. She knows how to operate all her equipment. Nikon is a very, very beautiful camera. I'm not a camera enthusiast, but I have friends who do, professional photographers, so it's nice that they have a nice Nikon camera over here. The D3S. Okay. Anyways, I'm geeking out on equipment here. But it's kind of nice that, a camera is how she's able to find, this person just kind of going about without a, proper, warm jacket and hiking gear, She's like, what's going on? And we thought that the main story was this hidden discovery, when we realized it was actually she was looking for this individual for quite some time. The intrepid reporter, you get to see this nearly made tunnel, which is made by heat vision. Very creepy. Heat vision over here creating the tunnel. Clark over here is just beginning to discover his ships, Kryptonian ships, his heritage. Great shot of this ship stuck in the ice. We get to see shapes that are not very angular. It's a lot more organic ship. Kind of tells you it's of alien origin. I like the way it's lit. There wouldn't be that many light sources, below the ice. And these, little core robots, they're kind of dusty. This station itself had a little bit of dust coming up. And here's the pendant that he's been carrying for quite some time. It is what his dad gave him, in the basement. And he sees that the shape matches, but he's like, hey, I brought the key, I'm not here to do harm. What's going on? Why are you doing this to me, you robot? The fact that he's fighting with this robot, the sentient entity, it's running unautomated. And, this is a shock to him because, he hasn't been hurt physically until this little robot kind of nicks him in the arm. Great product placement by Lois Lane. And here we have a frozen Genesis chamber, the command chair, and we see this person kind of walking about. Kal-El goes, what the heck is that all about? Is this a ghost? Am I being someone pranking me? What's going on? Lois Lane is, still investigating, and she comes across, the little floating, sentinel. Over here we have some capsules. Upon closer inspection, we see that it's a mummified Kryptonian being, and an open capsule. Two plot points that are not very big, but they are there. Hopefully in other sequels they'll enhance on those findings. And we have the flash, the camera being interpreted as a threat by this little sentinel or little drone. And a great introduction of Superman and Lois. If you remember Action Comics #1, she is very feisty. The only way she gets into trouble is because, she's a reporter, she has principles, and, sometimes, she wants to get this story, and that puts her in dangerous situations. It's not that, she is helpless at all. It's more that, she is not bulletproof. She is basically all of us. We are all human. We are often put in dangerous situations ourselves. It's very interesting that Kal-El uses heat vision to heal the wound. I imagine with his, with his X-ray vision, he's able to see what he's doing as he's cauterizing, all the flesh. Perhaps with his superpowers, he's known how frail human bodies tend to be. Me as a medical student, I am, learning all kinds of wonderful things. I'm sure if I had X-ray vision and see how the body worked, I'd be a much better expert quite sooner. We see this amazing ship melting a giant portion of ice. You see the ice coming off from the top of the scout ship, as it's called. And I like the shape of this. The shape, it's kind of, I wouldn't say like a shell, but it looks a little organic, maybe like a really ancient arrowhead, as it were, kind of worn down and not as sharp. Again, wonderful cinematography over here. We have the helicopter from Canada going to rescue, and I am very happy that they have this live shot of somebody in the snow. It's not a CGI person placed over there in that island of snow. I think it really helped the shot, to sell the validity and veridity of it. We cut to Lois Lane telling the story to Perry White, played by Mr. Fishburne, Mr. Lawrence Fishburne, Morpheus from Matrix. And also from not Heart of Darkness, but that movie with Coppola. Anyways, great roles here. Perry White, Lois Lane. They're talking about censorship, and he's like, hey, don't print this. I have no doubts in your abilities. This is not like me questioning you, but you need to have more sources, and can you believe what would happen if people really read there are aliens out there? So here we have a character, Woodward, which kind of looks like Mr. Julian Assange. It is pretty. If you know Assange, you kind of recognize the similarity, and it's just like a hidden homage to Mr. Julian Assange, either for better or worse. You're dealing with journalists, and here we have a polar bear to make that Kevin Smith guy happy, and the executive who wanted polar bear fights in the previous Superman movie, John Peters, I believe. And the chair kind of moves upwards to reveal Jor-El. I like the fact that there is a full body hologram of Jor-El. I like the the kind of fact that it's a little bit more human and walks around and talks to his kid, kind of like the living version of Jarrell. You know, it's kind of nice and refreshing. I happen to enjoy, a lot of versions of Jarrell. I know there was another one in Smallville. Again, Marlon Brando, and I really like Russell Crowe. I think that his demeanor, as he's gotten older, is a little bit more. His voice is a little bit deeper. He's not the action superstar that he used to be, but there's this comfort in his voice, especially when he begins to narrate, Kryptonian society. And you can kind of see that this amazing portrayal of Kryptonians and the capes and the emblems, especially the House of El, being, scientists and explorers, it's a really great scene. One of the wonderful things about showing, not telling, is that you get a visual representation of what the society did, exploring other planets and trying to expand their civilization beyond their means. We have these amazing headdress of the Kryptonian Council. We have the explanation of how birth was mandatory and how childbearing policies were formed. That free births are not allowed, but you have to be like either a soldier or scientist or something to help the society. We have a very interesting shot of Zod looking like Lenin. This Superman S shield going into Earth, and the little escape pod is very interesting. And then we have a little stroll. As you can see, the Genesis chamber is back here. But I would assume that Genesis chamber was just actually frozen ice in the front cockpit. But this is obviously the Genesis chamber. They're kind of empty, but they need the codex to kind of bring them all to life, to have Krypton kind of live again. It's a lot of information to digest for Kal-El. The look that Kal-El gives Jarrell over here, it's kind of like the look that the little Kal-El gave to Jonathan Kent. Like, wow, I'm part of this giant, bigger world. Can I just be your child and stuff like that? So it is a very, very powerful scene. Okay, so we are getting close to the amazing explanation of the House of El emblem. It's very interesting to know that this is the first cinematic explanation of the S shield and Superman. Also, I really love the reveal of the costume already, set to go. There's been a lot of versions of the costume. Some of them were just like spandex. The New 52 was kind of armor. It makes sense that this was shown as being some kind of like warrior basic suit, kind of like Mithril and Middle Earth. Something that a lot of Kryptonians were. And then they piled up other items for costumes. Very epic first shot of Superman backlit. Really quite epic. I think that when I went to see this in the cinema, people were cheering. I love this amazing, monologue of they'll race you, they'll stumble, but in time they'll help you achieve wonders. I mean, it's taken right out of the comics, combination of comics. If you ever read, Mark Waid and Grant Morrison, most of the Superman modern mythos, kind of are embedded in that monologue, and I like the way the soundtrack picks up. Over here, it looks like a flea, jumping, from point A to point B. But that's how the original Superman was in the comics. Over here, we see Kal-El thrusting his arms to gain more momentum, but failing to keep up in the air because he's quite new. So he doesn't know how to stay up. He knows how to get up there, and then he cuts like the top of the mountain as he comes down. Very, very epic moment. And obviously, I love this costume. I really love it. It does remind me of most of the musculature, the strong man personality that was obviously meant to be the original Superman, kind of like a strong man. I like the fact that Cavill really put on a lot of muscle for this movie. And I don't know if you ever gone to YouTube, but the following scene where Kal-El and Superman, kneels down, fist on the floor, and there's debris, kind of floating around his magnetism as he's starting to pick up. This particular scene, I recommend to YouTube a baby's response to this scene. The baby has no preconceived notion of Marvel versus DC, has never heard of Rotten Tomatoes or any a-hole movie critic. The baby is newborn. It has nothing, no bias, and this baby reacts to this scene the way all of our inner childhood should and ought to do, with awe and just wow. I was inspired with this scene. What would it be like to fly like Superman? Here we go. We even have like a shadow, of Superman as, he's going flying. A little homage to the radio show with a little sound. Amazing. Here we go, how he's working the mechanics of going left and right. This amazing epic shot of him looking downward. And then we have the homage to the end of the Richard Donner Christopher Reeves film in the middle of our film. I mean, you cannot ask for more. Very, very inspiring and amazing, reveal. We cut to Lois Lane, tracing the steps of, his various adventures, and, this savior, left a nice trail. And that's the one thing that I always, made me happy with this adaptation, that, Lois Lane is the first one to see who, Superman is, or, Clark Kent can do. The fact that she would be a great reporter and not find out is kind of disservice to her. It's also a disservice to Clark Kent because, if you are in any kind of relationship, that honesty and sincerity are, they help to build a relationship. A relationship that is built on distrust doesn't really quite help. So we have the Jonathan Kent gravestone. And out of nowhere, we hear Clark show up. It kind of shows you the close proximity that he is with his mom. I mean, even though he's, traveling the world and stuff, he's still kind of keeping in touch. It's interesting that he came to the cemetery to talk to Lois before going to, his home to talk to Mom. And I think, he wanted to do this to kind of get through Lois and explain to her why, he had to, do things in hiding. My father believed the world wasn't ready. And, if you know much about history, any person who wants to change the world, sometimes people are not ready. Most of the baby boomers grew up with the JFK assassination and the Martin Luther King and the Malcolm X, people who were in their views, trying to make the world a better place that were taken from us, And there's a small line in the sequel that the American conscience died with Martin. Martin Lawrence said that, but he said with Robert, John, and Robert, the two Kennedys, and Martin Luther King Jr. died. So it's really interesting that a lot of people tend to forget that why couldn't Clark Kent just put on the costume and go out and save people? It's no big deal. We live in a society where where Obama was trashed in the media for wearing a tan suit, and the current president, Trump, is ridiculed for his, body weight. Whatever your policies and your political views, we have the previous two presidents were criticized in their wardrobe. So it's not just a matter of, Democrat or liberal, it's just more like you will be ridiculed if you have power, so putting on a costume, and trying to make the world a better place, you will be ridiculed no matter what policies you're trying to do. The world's not that simple, and I think it would be a disservice to make a film about Superman with the simplistic kind of views. For instance, there is no mention of, global warming in this scene causing this tornado, because anybody who lives in the Midwest doesn't care whether you believe in climate change or not. They've been dealing with tornadoes for a while. So anybody who lives in the tornado belt will tell you that, you can take your belief or not belief of climate change and be like, hey, I know tornadoes happen. And so over here we have, Jonathan Kent sacrificing himself because he knew that his son was not ready. It goes hand in hand. He knew that the world might be ready, but his son was not ready. He needed to learn what sacrifice was. It's not so much that he's going to go out there and change the world. It's more like people around him are not bulletproof. People around him cannot survive a hurricane or falling debris. And I think that's the lesson of this movie that a lot of people didn't get through. It wasn't so much that the world isn't ready for a Superman, like, we're just going to ridicule him. It's more that innocent people will suffer regardless, whether it's friends of Superman or haters that want to hit him, or things like that. Whatever happens, people around Superman will die, and I think that's the death of Jonathan Kent exemplifies here. So that kind of made Lois change her tune, just like that. Like Perry White says, what happened? Did your story run out? It's like, no. It's just, I just didn't want it. And I think it's very interesting because she knows that anybody around Superman is going to be in trouble. She knows that, that's the lesson that Jonathan Kent sacrificing himself was meant, and she's not willing to risk her life for this article, risk the life of Perry White or every single staff member. If you remember, Charlie Hebdo, it took a lot of courage to, have solidarity with a cartoonist that worked in your building. And a lot of people, died as a result of that. Any journalist knows similarly that any kind of news by association is dangerous. So again, we have a bunch of wonderful shortcuts to, the butterfly, the Midwest, the window and things like that. The awesome dog responding to, Clark Kent arriving. It's very Midwest. Very flat land. We get to see the crops over here. Obviously, the Kent farm is running. She might not be able to do all of the things herself, so she might have, crop sharing, which is very modern after 2008. You have share crops and share profits. We saw that, she has a job in the sequel, working at a restaurant or cafe. So we know that times are hard, for a single mom or a widower now. So even though, we're dealing with a grown man who could potentially work anywhere and, help her mom, she's, well by herself, and her dog. She's very happy, obviously, to see him. She knows that he's going out there to do what he was meant to do, save the world. And it's interesting. I seem to recall in the theater and commercials that the truck that Clark Kent arrived had the logo of Coca-Cola and Coke Zero, I think. But on the Blu-ray, it had LexCorp. I'm not sure if it was like a limited promotional or a placeholder. But it is an interesting trivia for those of you that are paying attention to these movies as close as we are. The other cool thing to know is that, Superman is smiling. For all the people out there who say, hey, he never smiled in the movie. I was like, well, did you watch the movie? Were you high? General Swanwick introduction. This is a wonderful actor. He's been in so many great movies. He was on The Matrix 2 and 3. Recently, you could have seen him in Chirac by Spike Lee. I really like him as an actor. He is in the sequel, Batman vs. Superman. Great actor. And this, this other scientist, Dr. Hamill, I believe. I remember seeing him first in the sequel to Jurassic Park, The Lost World. If you remember the scene, the high hide, that's him right there. Alert. Toner empty. Kind of a nice joke. This movie has a little bit of subtle humor where it needs to be. Not forced humor, but humor based on, the material and situations. Obviously, something grim is about to happen, so starting out the scene with a little bit of levity really helps. I really enjoy the live CNN logos. Help bring some reality. So does the Budweiser. We see Kansas State game. Clark's still a homegrown, Kansas boy. Pretty awesome. I'm not really into sports that much other than soccer. So it's nice that, even though Henry Cavill loves rugby, he is playing someone from the U.S. who loves American football. Awesome. Again, we're seeing this spacecraft. And, every news network has synchronicity, to this object making quite an appearance. If you're a fan of the X-Files, you know that UFOs have a tendency to interact with electromagnetic and, disturbing the electricity. This sound reminded me of The Outer Limits or the horror movies from the 70s. It's so pitch dark. You think like The Ring was going to attack you and stuff. But then again, I've been in places where the lights have gone out, and I think this is actually way too bright. When the lights go out and the TV is the only source, it's a lot more darker. There's a lot more unified light here. Of course, it's for, cinematic purposes. But yeah, people who say, oh my god, this movie is really dark. Well, they actually have more sources of light than they should, because it's a movie and you want to be able to see the actors' response to the screens. And I really love this viral marketing of "You Are Not Alone." The distortion in Zod's message is still very haunting to this day. If we were promoting a movie, Men of Steel, right now, there would be like an app on Facebook where you point your phone at your face and it would do that voice distortion and the pixelization. That thing was amazing. I love it. And I love the fact that it's being broadcasted worldwide in every language. The fact that even though the majority of the people of Earth speak English, it's nice that they're including everybody in the planet because, Clark Kent could have been born in Russia. Or not born, but landed in Russia, right? Well, the character of Clark Kent could have, sprung up in Russia. There's a modern Chinese Superman in the DC comics, which is pretty damn cool. So, I like that universal inclusion because it makes the thread quite bigger. This is not a bad guy twirling a mustache, threatening, a damsel in distress. We're talking about a whole worldwide phenomenon here, and the media plays a big role in this film because of course journalism. Over here we have Woodward kind of letting out the big secret that Lois Lane knows who this being is. So obviously Perry White is concerned about Lois, and the fact that they mentioned the feds and the FBI, and then all of a sudden the feds show up. This got a big laugh in the movie theaters, because the feds, man. And interesting thing about this shot, according to Zack Snyder, it was all done in one take, but because they had to cut down the film, they chopped it. But apparently there was a whole sequence where where she grabs her bag upwards, runs downstairs, and the military finds her. It was a one continuous, ambitious shot. I would love to see that. Because those shots are always very, very difficult to do. We have here a very nice scene of a conflicted Kal-El going to seek out advice. Previously, when he was encountering a bully, like in this flashback, he would have his dad. One of the things that I like is that he's reading Plato or Plato's Republic. So if you know anything about that book, you can see that anybody who reads that book, tends to be a little bit not smarter, but is more aware of the world and how things are run. Which is what I was talking about, how the threat of Zod was a global one. In this particular scene, we get to see that, Pete Ross, who was previously a bully, is now offering his hand. Clark could have easily destroyed that guy as he destroyed that pole. We see Sullivan's in the background, a nice homage to Chloe Sullivan from Smallville. And we see Jonathan Kent over here offering advice to his son, he is asking him, did they hurt you? Like, not physically, but emotionally, because, that's the one weakness prior to Kryptonite that Superman has, is his ability to be human, to feel things, is what the enemies will be getting the best of him. Controlling those emotions are going to be tough for him, as it is with any human being. So the fact that he doesn't have a dad anymore and can't quite seem to go to the, fly all the way over there to, to wherever he has a scout ship and ask his hologram father for help. He has, a religious figure, a father figure, and this priest. So, the whole notion of looking for help, and then you have a really iconic Christian imagery here with the red cape, obviously. the Christ figure came out as the fall of the Roman Empire, who also wear red capes. So you can kind of say that the Roman Empire signified Krypton, and the Christ represented the survivor who endured past, the Roman Empire. It is one example. It is not the only example, because other religions exist in other worlds, and obviously there is the Book of Ra for Kryptonians as a religious book of their own. I really enjoy this shot of Superman hovering above a military base. It's very Alex Ross inspired. It's one of those shots that I wish we would have like a GIF, or just kind of a loop of that. I kind of don't like how the sun is peering through it, because I want to enjoy this shot particularly. And then we cut to, him surrounding himself to the military with a bunch of, handcuffs. Kind of a beautiful scene over here to build up the relationship between Lois Lane and Superman. We get the chance to see some of their, cute, flirtatious interest in one another. It's very clear that, to anybody who sees the movie, that they have the hots for each other. And here he explains that, it's not an S, it's a symbol of hope. You can tell that these two actors had a lot of great time with their, with the roles. I know that, for instance, they had a lot of fun in the set. I mean, both people have, other attachments, other movies, responsibilities, but, Rachel Adams really is a big fan of Superman since she was a kid. She stated on many times she actually wanted to be Lois Lane for Superman Returns, and she was a guest on Smallville. It's a way smaller role, so it's kind of nice and obvious that the chemistry between these two are it's pretty evident. And we see a nice shot of Superman just kind of breaking the handcuffs. It's like, you're not going to control me, buddy. It's going to be on my terms. And I think that, it kind of goes back to xenophobia or all kinds of phobias. People are scared of what is out of their control, especially with the military and being kind of like Superman. The fact that this particular shot of Superman and Lois Lane just looking at each other reminds me of the shot from Watchmen. A lot of people say that might be kind of a weird reference, but it actually makes sense. In the comic, that's when Night Owl and a brand new Silk Spectre are about to embark in their mission. Likewise, the shot embarks that these two are, close. They feel it. And, they seem to like each other, because she could have turned him in anytime she wanted to. She didn't. Obviously, she cares more about him than just the story. And, for a Pulitzer Prize winning person, uncovering Superman would have been the pinnacle of any journalists. The fact that she didn't kind of shows you that she really cares about the human aspect behind the story. So Superman kind of feels the same way. It's like, this is one of the first people that have actually had any compassion towards me in such a grandiose sort of way. We see the ship approaching. It is kind of organic. Goes back to the same motif. A very interesting design indeed. One of the coolest things about this whole ordeal is that this reminds me of movies from the 50s when aliens arrived to Earth and stuff. It is pretty interesting. There were response from the military, And, the fact that we see Fiora just walking very, very confident, like she doesn't give a damn. Um, it is very, very interesting how she checks out Superman's outfit, like, you're just wearing the undergarments without any armor. Also notice her helmet is really kind of modern. I really like the fact that they use like some kind of weird gel to have like a breathing apparatus, and the fact that it was done in computer, in CGI, kind of makes it a little bit more alien in nature. They could have just done some really simplistic things to kind of save budget, but they didn't. So the fact that they had this is pretty quite amazing. One of the things that really captivated me was the fact that Lois was kind of brave to say, "Yeah, I'll go." Even though Zod knows that having a human hostage, it's kind of it's showing the humans how things are gonna roll. He's letting them know who is in control. One of the coolest things that I like about this film is that tonality wise, the first half we build up on the characters, and then the second half is just that's where the action picks up. Lois now has the key that has Jor-El in it. She doesn't know what to do with it yet. She kind of gives a look at Superman like, "What?" And Superman kind of shakes his head like, "Not yet, just hold on. You will definitely know." I am watching this film on a 4K television from a 4K Blu-ray player, and the cinematography on this film really stands out. It is almost like seeing it in a cinema in a way. I have a nice giant television at home, and all the costumes really pick up. For instance, I mentioned how blown away I was by Zod's costume being CGI, and here we have it. I mean, I can't even tell that's CGI. It's such a wonderful job. The spaceships out in space, they look pretty intimidating. Really dark and grimy and things like that. We're seeing the effects of kryptonite, but shown in a much more different way. Basically in the atmospheric conditions. Kind of really smart way of writing kryptonite into the story. There is a nightmare sequence in Batman vs Superman, and I think this is how they're gonna tie in a lot of these films. Just having nightmare or kind of dreamlike revelations. There is another one in Wonder Woman that is very similar to this one. It is very interesting to have Kal-El experience this through a dream state. If you remember correctly, Gilgamesh, the first superpowered hero in writing, in mythology, experienced dreams, so we get a nice exposition here within the dream, how the Kryptonians were set free once the Phantom Zone was destroyed, or the doorway, I should say, to the Phantom Zone was destroyed. Again, the suits, the undergarments, they kind of look like a chainmail, like a Kryptonian version of it. If you look at the interviews for the custom designers, that's the inspiration that they got to. And notice that they're using Kryptonian technology to travel from world to worlds, kind of in search for hospitable planets. And one of my theories is that all these colonies failed because of, I want to say, Brainiac. If they ever bring it into it, I'm not sure if they're going to go with, the classic version of Brainiac, but there is something interesting that goes on with this machine, the terraforming machine. there are three triangular dots, or dots in a triangular format, which kind of has been the always symbol of Brainiac in the comics that we see in the terraforming machines when they are ignited. So maybe that is a clue for the future as to how, the Kryptonian civilization failed. We see Zod with a black costume, kind of like, foreshadowing things to come. And, he makes a really good point that, in order to bring Krypton, you need a fertile ground. A lot of people on the internet were like, well, why didn't Zod colonize Mars? I'm like, well, why don't you build a house out in the vacuum of space? Oh, I need materials. Of course you do. You need materials to build anything. Engineering 101. So we have a very dark turn of events here. They kind of show you that not only they're planning to terraform Earth, but they're also talking about genocide. So in this version, General Zod is basically alien Hitler, destroying the inferior races. That to me is a very Superman accurate depiction of villainy, because we have Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, battling Nazi sentiments by reclaiming the Übermensch motif in their creation. So we have a general here, a military leader who has been programmed from birth to do what's best for quote-unquote his people. Again, there is a lot of layers of complexity to these characters. And here you see Kal-El look at the killer of his father, of his Kryptonian father. So now we have established motives for both of our protagonist and antagonist, which is pretty damn awesome. The film does pick up right about now. One of the interesting things is that we don't have any other superheroes in this picture or in this film. So it makes sense that the U.S. military would be portrayed as Superman's Justice League. I find it very interesting that in the promotion of this movie, there were certain commercials filmed by Zack Snyder supporting the Coast Guard and the Army Reserves, for any kind of number of hurricanes or, something that is not political, something that everybody can get behind. Troops rescuing people in dangerous situations is very akin to Superman. Zack Snyder and WB were not just sponsoring, troops just because they were sponsoring troops saving lives, which is kind of, I wouldn't say a benign use of the army, because the army can destroy evil in the world. But it is, the best case scenario for military and, a world power to do, just save people. Speaking of saving people, we have Lois Lane, who is the quote-unquote key to this whole movie. If you recall, being the damsel in distress has always been an annoying cliche in movies. Over here, she's actually doing something. If it wasn't for her, the world wouldn't know Superman would have existed. He might have been operating out in the shadows, just saving people and not being so public. But, because she did her expose, she shotgunned it across the internet, as Perry White said, we have an open view of Superman, which I guess, it's a lot of things that all these movie review critics never seem to pay attention or notice. They don't analyze the actions and reactions of these characters because they're too busy, appealing to their base. The scene that it's coming up, referred to as the Battle of Smallville, it's one of the best action scenes that I've seen done in a very small budget big budget combo. I'll explain more on that later. Jor-El here is doing ridiculously amazing, cool things with his hands. I recall Kevin Smith saying that was like he wanted to have that superpower because he's just fat or something like that. Funny. Anyways, I love the shot of Henry Cavill slowly getting up, showing that the atmosphere from Earth is, giving him his powers back that his cells have retained. I really love that. The soundtrack again, it's very amazing by Hans Zimmer. I can't get enough of the soundtrack actually, and I am very glad that in Batman vs Superman, a lot of these soundtrack bits were redone in a really nice manner and remixed. There are certain things like You Are. In the sequel, there is a song called You Are My World, which kind of refers to this one as if you love these people so much. It's kind of amazing. Over here, we don't have a damsel in distress. She's kind of doing her own thing. She's standing up to superpowered people. I mean, that takes a lot more courage than, people give her credit for. Again, amazing shot of Superman. I can't stress enough the perfect casting of Henry Cavill for this role. I think he was definitely born to play Superman. There was a scrap project called Superman Flyby, which J.J. Abrams was supervising, which I guess turned Superman into a cop. I know, it's kind of ridiculous. But Henry Cavill did screen tested for that role. And I think someone in Warner Brothers have kept a close eye on him for the Superman role. Here we have a very, Christ-like pose, and it's symbolism. There's been other poses like that, and crucifixion has existed prior to Christianity. So a lot of people that have problems with that or want to just not acknowledge that, well, Christianity has borrowed elements from other, from other societies, i.e., see the the first holy book of the Bible. But over here, we have our very first Superman saving Lois in full costume, which is an amazing sight to behold. It is a staple of the comics, and again, it's not because Lois is a woman, it's because Lois is chasing the story, which I guess is really, it's pretty realistic. A lot of journalists across the world are putting themselves in danger, to report things. So, if you take away anything from Lois Lane, is that you need to appreciate journalism and not just, memes or catchy headlines or things like that. We tend to live in a meme society, or a society that only reads the headlines and not the actual news or materials included in those posts. So, go out there and support journalism. I love this look of Kal-El going, hey, wait a minute. They read your mind. They know who my parents are. So I love the fact that he's raising away. And, if all these Kryptonians showed up in your home and started doing trouble, you would be a little freaked out. I like the fact that Diane Lane as Martha Kent, she's still kind of feisty and she's still not bowing down to their demands. It takes a lot of courage, And one of the wonderful things about Fiora here is that she is really fearless, man. The way her body moves is just exudes confidence. She knows she's powerful. She's like, hey, we can do all these amazing things, speed and superpowers. She's owning all her abilities rather quickly, whereas Zod is throws a truck into the house, instead of like, him tearing the house apart looking for the key, which is a much more smarter thing to do. And again, no one threatens anybody's mom. If you if you were a kid, which I'm assuming you were at some point, nobody said when somebody said something bad about your mom, you would respond. So again, it's Superman being very human. I've been here in the States for a while, and when certain kids joke to other kids about their mama jokes and they don't respond, I was really appalled. I'm like, dude, in other parts of the world, you would get beat up, not just by the person that you made fun of, but by everybody in the classroom. Say, hey, mothers are sacred around the world. So in the U.S., when they have yo mama jokes, I'm just like, ugh, these people have no respect. I know it's a culture thing, kind of a culture shock, right? But over here we have Zod not being able to fully, digest all his new powers. He's having a lot of difficulty because they're all coming at him at the same time. Super hearing, super sight, everything. And I love the fact that Superman could take a giant cannon to the chest, from a Kryptonian weapon. Because again, our Earth and, our sun gives him superpowers. The Kryptonian weaponry still affects him, but he's still Superman. He's still the Man of Steel. He can take it. This was a nice camera work. We are led to believe that they got away, and then all of a sudden we have two Kryptonians walking down on Main Street, USA. I love the fact that the civilians are told to get inside, even though Superman's going to go into battle mode, he's still caring about people. Speaking of people, we have more shots of the military who are in this film his Justice League. Although in this particular portion, they don't know that, he's our friend. So he's also going to be targeted. I love this cowboy, close up of the fists, like two cowboys going to, shoot guns in the old West. Very Americana, as it were, And here we have the machine guns hitting all three. Cal tries to get away, but, the bullets are too much. Fiora just kind of stands there until the last minute, and she's not hit. She's very clever, and she's military number 2 to Zod, so of course she's a little bit more clever than most. Here we have this giant dude attacking the ships, and one of the things that I've noticed in the slow motion, the pilot over here gets torn apart, dismembered. You can see just a gush of blood. If the Motion Picture Association of America would have been paying attention, this would have gotten an R-rated. But they didn't. They're not paying attention. I love this shot of Superman just saving that other pilot from certain doom, crashing into the IHOP. Very surreal experience. I always, as a little kid, wished that superheroes would do this to all my surroundings, because I would love to see any superhero crash into my restaurant or the mall, see two superheroes fighting. Would have been nice, as a little kid. So this is like a kid's dream come true. Go to IHOP with your parents, after church or something, and then all of a sudden, these two superpower beings just crash into it. It's pretty cool. Some people might say it's product placement, but for me, it's a childhood dream come true. And this shot of Cal in front of the safe is something that Zack Snyder teased. That was the first reveal of Henry Cavill in the suit, and I think he also storyboarded that particular shot and sketch. Here we have some really, really cool fighting sequences. Very fast cam, shaky cam. And again, the camera only moves the more action there is, which is kind of a thematic, use of the camera work. After all, this is based on Action Comics, so for people complaining that the that the action camera is too actiony on an Action Comics movie, it's ridiculous. You want to have that kind of kinetic viability. You want to have that kind of movement, to make all these shots kind of go. If you ever been in a real fight, it's never really, static. I've been in about 3 fights in my life. I've lost one. And I can tell you that sometimes you don't really know what the hell is going on. Things just happen very quickly. Over here, the fact that we can tell what's going on, but it's still kinetic, it still kind of shows you that, yeah, even though it's shaky cam, but you can still know what's going on. The simple fact that we're having a conversation about it, and bloggers everywhere can give you a shot-by-shot description, means that the camera work wasn't as shaky as the haters made it out to be. That, oh my god, it's so shaky, I can't even tell what's going on. Maybe like 1% of the population couldn't, but that's why you have to pick a nice seat at the cinema or sit far away from it at home. Fiora here just doing ridiculously great work, really fast, just zap, 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 zap. I mean, this is just amazing. We've never seen anybody fight like that in film. And when I first saw that, I was like, oh man, imagine Wonder Woman. So I imagine when Wonder Woman, gets to her full abilities, kind of like Fiora here, oh man, it's going to be pretty damn epic. For cinematic purposes, making your villain just zap really fast is not the best use for people that want to be show off. But if you want to be true to material and honest, that's what you do. And I really love this fight where Superman is hovering and punching a bad guy that is bigger than him. I can tell you that in the comics, Superman hovering has always been one of the best sights to behold. And here we have a nice homage to the movie 300, A Good Death. This is Son Reward by Fiora. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And, shout out to the military, because they fight these kind of battles every day. Not Kryptonians, but, battles that put their life in danger, with the odds against them. So it's kind of a nice, touchy, moment here. The fact that we're paying homage to the military with something called Superman or Man of Steel. Interesting note, Fiora here, for every human you save will kill 1 million more. That seems a very final solution to me. Again, anybody who who is against, fascism or racial supremacy or superiority would understand that these this type of Kryptonians are not to be trusted. The fact that Zod is basically alien Hitler kind of makes you realize that no matter what, you don't have a choice. She even tells him in the IHOP, the fact that you possess some kind of morality means that we are superior, because they don't care. They don't freaking give a damn, whereas we do. We want to preserve life. We want to, have a global homeostasis, as it were. And that's what Superman, stands for over here. He understands that at first the U.S. military didn't see him as an ally, as a trusted person. So that's why he's standing over here very, very much like, hey, I could take away your weapons, and I'm not. I'm a friend here, and it's the look that they give him. There's a reason why, he is almost wearing the USA flag as his color emblems. And then so that people understood that, he was one of them. a human. So I really love this shot. I think this is one of my favorite shots in the film. You see the military, Superman, and then the American flag, the USA flag in the background. That's an amazing shot. And a lot of people say, "Oh, Sears product placement," but Sears started as a very small store. So that's also like a piece of American pie, as it were. Something that started really small and became kind of a giant corporate entity. So a lot of these, quote unquote product placements started out really small. And that's the American dream. If you work hard, you can become a giant, globalist corporation. I like the fact that Martha here is saving the pictures. She, out of all the things that she could be saving from the house, she just saved like the baby pictures and, all those memories. From my personal experience, I can relate. My house in Mexico went through something of a giant garage sale, as it were. And a lot of my toys and possessions were, sold or given away. But I was glad that my baby pictures still were intact. So this kind of makes me feel kind of relatable. This relates to me. Over here, they're explaining to Zod that the codex is hidden in the cells of Kal-El. Now, in human physiology, your cells kind of regenerate. I think that by every 10 years, you have a brand new body, or something ridiculous like that. But yeah, your cells are always regenerating. Old cells are discarded, and you get new ones. I don't know how Kryptonian physiology is, or it'd be interesting to know if he generates new Kryptonian cells, maybe without it. But either way, it's still a very interesting concept of hiding things within the cells of a multicellular organism. I like the fact that these two ships kind of disengage from one another to have like one go to the South China Sea, I believe. I love these shots. They look almost like real images from the space station. And I have to say that all the people who did the special effects for this film have done a wonderful job. There are a lot of CGI works that are subpar, in my opinion, in other films, but in this one, they did a great job. A lot of people want no glares, no shaky cam, no darkness. You can't really get perfect shots like that unless you're in a studio with controlled lighting and lack of movement. The fact that some of these shots are as iconic as this is because there are things in the foreground and in the background. There are natural things like highlights, a little bit of lens flare here and there. Not every shot has lens flare, let's be honest. And there's atmosphere. The ship is kind of obstructed by, the Earth's atmosphere, so it looks a little bit faded when it's, a little bit far away. So yeah, the fact that the special effects know what they're doing and they're not giving us like a pop superstar photo shoot version of our superheroes is really awesome. Sometimes the superheroes are in strong light. Sometimes the superheroes are in dark light. That's because that's what happens in the normal world. In the normal world, we don't have a monochromatic studio lighting. That is amateurish and childish. So people complaining that, sometimes this movie is a little bit dark in cinematography. Well, do you only live in the daylight? Are you afraid of the dark? Do you not go out at night? Or, what's up with that? And here we have the mayhem of this giant alien structure using gravity to pound the city of Metropolis to rubble. I was the first time I saw this, I was just kind of shocked. I was like, "Whoa, they're using gravity as a weapon." That's kind of a giant reference to Man of Steel's Grant Morrison as All-Star Superman. By the way, check out that book. It's truly amazing. So I was shocked, but in future versions, when I saw this film again, I was kind of horrified. Like, oh my god, Zod is really living up to his alien Hitler promise or motif. I'm like, these people are getting pulverized, and I would be scared to death. Here we have the first mention of Superman as a name. That's what they're calling him. And let's see. We are going to get into the final act. So this would be described as Act 3. I would infer that Act 2 started as soon as we saw Superman walk out of the ship. So this is basically where Act 3 begins. We have the plan. It's very straightforward. The military is going to use the engine of Kal-El's baby rocket ship to generate, some kind of singularity to get rid of the main ship on Metropolis. They all agree, they're all equal under this plan. Superman will not act unless the military is down with it, because most of the heavy fighting will be done by the military, and they're not bulletproof. Here Lois asks, well, aren't you going to be weakened by their atmosphere as soon as you get close? And he's like, yeah. And I love this kind of bit of humor. It's like, hey, maybe step back a little bit more. Some levity in this movie that a lot of people say, oh, it had no humor. I'm like, well, you weren't paying attention. So I really love all these shots of him flying. The shots of the destruction is just, oh man, kind of heartbreaking, and it's what I call hyper realism. It's taking something familiar and kind of just enhancing it. So, for instance, if you've seen, for my generation, 9/11 was the biggest, catastrophe we would ever experienced. So images of that come to mind. But since now we've had Aleppo and in Syria, where it's just rubble, an entire city blown to smithereens. I mean, it's just horrible to look at. And here we have the U.S. Air Force and the military just kind of being the Justice League that Kal-El needs. Eventually he will have, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Cyborg, and possibly Green Lantern, Batman, obviously. So yeah, we have a nice homage over here to the men and women of steel of the military. As a homage. Over here, the shot of the hand against the sun by Zod will be replicated by Kal-El later on. We have a disfigured key, which is kind of a homage to, Bizarro. I know, it's kind of subtle, but it's there. I like this exchange between Hologram, Jor-El, and Zod. The fact that they still have these kind of conversations in such a, action-packed movie kind of distinguishes DC Comics from the rest. Over here, there is a really cool comic cover right here. The shot of Kal-El looking at the, terraforming going on, where Kal-El is filming the atomic bomb, or one atomic bomb testing in the ocean, and I think that's a homage to it. The attack on the Metropolis, terraforming Black Zero spaceship It's really amazing. I love all the ingenuity shots of the rockets just spinning out of control due to the gravitational shield that they have. And the shots of citizens running away, again, I can't stop thinking about 9/11. It's right there. So the shots of these people being terrified because of this giant, machine destroying most of Metropolis. It is interesting that the same kind of technology that the little sentinels from Krypton used to create a face, like a voice call, is used as a defense mechanism. And oh man, it's so terrifying looking at these airplanes losing altitude and stalling, because these pilots are going to be dead. The way the G forces operate, if you've ever been, briefed about it or know anything about how the pilots work, you can't just move the human body that quickly without losing consciousness. Here we have a cop trying to save people, steering them away from the falling building, which is just, I still get goosebumps, Here we live in California, and I'm always worried there's going to be the giant earthquake, so these films, although they're depicting, aliens fighting, we're human. We're still vulnerable to falling debris, So yeah, it's very scary. We cut back to Jor-El and Zod still having the argument of like, hey, you can't do this. You're insane, and I'm arguing married with a ghost, which is kind of sad because there are a lot of philosophies that have, proliferated even after the initial person has perished. People still want to finish, Hitler's job with the new Nazis. So it again, these are fictitious movies, but they still resonate with our present world today. One of the things that is very believable about Michael Shannon's Zod character is that you can take him and basically pinpoint to any number of crazy military people who command a nation nowadays. You can look at a lot of despots, around nations, and that's him, So yeah, the threat is still real. Zod may be an alien Hitler, but we still have a lot of those, bad guys, homeborn here on Earth. The fact that we have a giant machine fighting Kal-El, it's pretty awesome. Again, it kind of reminds me of like what Brainiac would be like in cinema. So we have Superman coughing, which is kind of unusual, but I guess if you're going to depict someone suffering, breathing is something that we take for granted. So if you catch Superman coughing, that he's in trouble. We cut to Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White. We see Jenny's hand stuck in debris. It's a pretty horrific, thing. And one of the things that a lot of people said that, Superman didn't save anybody. He doesn't inspire hope. Look at the scene. Here we have this guy who was like, God damn it, I want to leave. But because Perry White's staying there, and they know that Superman's out there trying to stop this, they're like, I'm going to hope that Superman stops this machine. They know that the alien surrounded himself to the military and they're working on it. They just know he's out there. They have hope that somehow, some way, Jenny will be saved. And this is like one of the best inspirational scenes. Superman's getting crushed by gravity by a machine from his homeworld. He looks, very distressed. And gravity affects Superman very, very much. Read All-Star Superman to read more. And the love that I have for this shot where he looks up and people think it's Christopher Reeve, No, it's just Henry Cavill all the way. The reason why people think it's Christopher Reeve is because Henry Cavill owns Superman. He is Superman. He is our Superman. People have nostalgia of Christopher Reeve, but to us, we have Henry Cavill. If he looks like Christopher Reeve, it's because you will believe that a man can fly. Henry Cavill owns that. And here we have the machine stopping. There you saw the 3 dots in a triangular formation, a clue for Brainiac. And, the machine in the South China Sea is destroyed, which destroys the connection to the Black Zero ship operating on top of Metropolis. So now they've given the okay to go, and we have the military attack. They're going to prep the machine. Amy Adams as Lois Lane over here is looking like, yes, I got this. And again, here is the shot that I was talking about. The hand, reaching out for the sun. The same shot that we saw from Zod. And it's just epic. We have a close-up of Henry Cavill, basking in the sun, recuperating as Superman. Amazing. Couldn't ask for more, right? The alien ship, here's the key, and it's not fitting correctly, clearly there are no instructions, obviously, and, it just adds a little bit more to the tension. This is tension on top of tension. We're racing towards a point to detonate the bomb, and then the bomb's not being lit up. Fiora sees them approaching. She knows that, they're really not a threat, so she's gonna just kind of toy with them. And then something, more pressure happens, more pressure on top of pressure. It's like, what the hell is that? Oh wow, it's a scout ship. So yeah, this scene is very intense, Zod clearly comfortable in his own skin, his own ship, his own command, and he is going to kill Lois. But here we have Superman to the rescue. He crashes into the ship, and I love this. If you destroy Krypton, if you destroy the ship, you destroy Krypton. And Superman thinks about it for a minute, and he goes, Krypton had his day. Which is amazing. It's an amazing sacrifice, It's a very epic dilemma, You're going to destroy the remaining Kryptonians. And the Kryptonians are still taking people's lives in these buildings, The ship just tore through the city again. The Genesis chamber spills all the liquid, going into the cockpit. Fiora is like, okay, Zod's taken down. I'm going to help out the best I can. Dr. Hamilton, or Emil, he looks at the thing not correctly. And I really love Fiora. She is one of the best bad guys to have graced the screen. I know that in the Richard Donner, Zod had, a lady helper. Who looked like Susie in the Banshees. She just looked goth, Fiora over here has armor, she doesn't just wait for Zod to order her around, she acts. So I think it's a little bit more empowering and more realistic, again with the speed, after seeing the first season of The Flash, I'm just like, yeah, the speed is definitely like something that a lot of Kryptonians have over us, And by the way, the other pilot on the ship was the actor who played Baby Kal-El in Richard Donner and Christopher Reeve's Superman, so it's a nice little cameo by him as well. The weapon is activated. Nice close-up of his shield. And, here we have another a good death is his own reward. Colonel Hardy is prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, as most of our amazing people in the military. Again, we have a really wonderful shot and cinematography is doing all the work. If you're paying any attention, the Kryptonians have this like glowing white vein electricity motif going on about them, and that's from All Star Superman by Grant Morrison. It's something that puts Superman in very close proximity danger to being decimated. So he's struggling. You see that on his face right there? Yeah, that's from All Star Superman. Very, very powerful. I got scared for a second, because if you know what happens in All Star Superman, you'd be worried for Superman as well. We have this lovely shot of debris falling on the right side, the camera swooping into the left. And one of the things that Russell Crowe mentioned about this film is that Zack Snyder used one camera. Russell Crowe made a film in Australia as well. He is a director. And, he's been on some giant movies, And it is still kind of something amazing for Zack Snyder and company to not gamble, but respect cinema enough to frame the picture in such a lovely way, so that when this kiss happens, there is some nice levity among all the destruction. It's a beautiful sentiment for hope, two people kissing, beating xenophobia. It's an amazing thing in the middle of all this destruction. And over here we have a much more calm sequence. You notice that the camera is not shaky anymore. It's very somber, ground level. The camera is not like shaking. It's very somber. It's very still, capturing Zod's deterioration into madness, full-on madness. He's showing just debris, saying this is what you left of Krypton. His whole mentality of I have nothing to live for. It's very, very, how should I put it? He's turned to rebel, because he doesn't know the status of the Genesis chamber. He's not a scientist. He's not gonna go and investigate and maybe like try to boot up the ship and flee again. He's a soldier. He was only bred for, being that. And that's the thing about, free will. If you have free will, you have other options. And, Zod does not operate like that. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, these two beings are ridiculously superpowered, but they have completely different ideologies. And you can kind of see why people would be naturally scared of Superman, because here we have an evil version of Superman, and that's Zod. I love these amazing epic shots of, gods basically battling among mortals, and that's the whole motif. A lot of these amazing shots have have taken in more weight after the sequel Batman vs. Superman has been released. And that's the thing about the DC Extended Universe, is that, you go back to watching these films, and all of a sudden this scene, you can't help but staring at it and being like, out there, Batman is watching the destruction of his building. This is Wayne Enterprises, the Metropolis branch. So the whole DC Universe keeps on building, even though this building comes down and it's really, really impactful for everybody. The consequences and the ramifications of said destruction is addressed, and it's an amazing thing. Sometimes these superhero movies just they just have wanton destruction for the sake of having shawarma later on, but no, in this universe there are consequences. And if you go to the YouTube channel Man of Steel Answers, they break down these fights, and they break down every single complaint about Superman saving people, things like that. One thing that they have pointed out time and time again is that Zod is a superior tactician. He has been fighting all his life. And Kal-El has only been Superman for a little bit. He's had time to save people, but he's never met someone who has the same amount of strength as he has, and and things like that. Oh man, very, very impactful. We have a LexCorp building. This is a very funny bit where no accidents have happened since and all of a sudden there's an accident. So there is some levity. It is from the humor in this movie comes from the surroundings, and I really love Michael Shannon's delivery here. He's teasing him. It's like, do you think you being a farm boy matches my military history? He is over here, gaining more power because he's more comfortable with who he is. Takes away his armor. Now he's able to float, which is pretty damn amazing. That pose right there reminds me of Black Adam from the, Captain Marvel comics, which, oh man, I can't wait to see that film either. The amazing shots of Superman trying to punch Zod out of the city. It's just an amazing showing that Superman still wants to protect people. Zod, however, says no. Screw you. I'm going to go back into the heart of the city. And this is why Superman looks so concerned over here. He's just like, oh no, we need to get out of here. This is the part of the city that's still, alive. Notice that Superman just brushes Zod's face against a building outside of it. He's not going through a building. What Zod do? Puts Superman through buildings. That's the difference between these two. And you can still see that, in the fight. They're both trying to outdo one another. And Superman throws Zod away from Earth. But, here we have Wayne Enterprises' satellite used against Superman. It's a foreshadowing of Batman versus Superman. A very, very strong confrontation as they're both, going through the atmosphere. Here we have the satellite breaking up into pieces, forming, just falling debris. Michael Shannon screaming. It's an amazing shot here of the Metropolis Central Station, which is Chicago. Actually, I've been there and I love Chicago. Over here, we have what Star Trek calls the Moriarty thing, Katumaru or something like that. Where Kotomaru, basically a no-win scenario. And so for Star Trek fans, this is kind of familiar territory, like a no-win scenario. Interesting note, in Richard Donner's Superman 2, Superman killed a depowered Zod by throwing him into a chasm. Over here we have alien Hitler, not wanting to budge until the last minute. I was the only one clapping at the scene in the cinema. Everybody else was impactful. Everybody was impacted by it. And I clapped because I got it. Superman here is killing fascism, which is, not a very subtle thing to do. And you can see that when you kill fascism, it takes a toll on you. You are killing part of your humanity, part of your fellow human beings. The problem with fascism is that they exude their superiority or presume superiority on you. And the only way to kill fascism is to say, no, we're all the same. And that includes, killing Hitler, alien Hitler, So it's a no-win scenario because if you kill a fascist, you become a murderer, So, now, it is no surprise that after World War II, a lot of people in the military had a lot of hard time, coming home and acting normal. You just don't kill fascism and turn out okay. There are, repercussions. And, one of the things that I like about this shot, cutting to, drone technology is that the Obama administration increased the use of drones. I don't care how you feel about Obama, good or bad, but drones have become a norm, if not just in the U.S. Military, for everybody else in the world. And it's a very unpersonal way of fighting. I was just mentioning World War II, and now all of a sudden, most of our military strategy comes from drones. It removes a lot of the human aspect from warfare and fighting. Which is what we were just talking about. The morals of fascism and how Superman. He was born in Kansas. He's as American as it gets. So even though this scene came right after a tragic event, it is still relevant, because we're still dealing with the ramifications of overreach of power in the form of drones. Here, more humor. I just think he's kind of hot, levity, beautiful green, grass, blue sky. There's color in this movie. I don't know what people are thinking, and it's just thematic color. Color is supposed to help tell the mood of the characters. Same thing with wardrobe. Same thing with framing, movement, and a lot of people don't know how to make movies nowadays, so they complain about things that are so elemental. People say, "Oh, there's no hope in this movie," and all of a sudden, you have this, little kid running with a dog. Beautiful sunset, the middle of the Midwest. There's a truck, being worked on by dad. I mean, mom's doing laundry out there, in the, out in the open, and you have a little kid with his little cape. The thing about being hopeful is that you can't be hopeful without the darkness. You need to overcome something. So the fact that we just, killed fascism, and all of a sudden, this is a beautiful shot of a kid doing the Superman pose with a cape. That's pretty iconic, That to me is the heart of the movie. It has heart. We see Kal-El smiling. He's with his mom. It's a beautiful ending. I like the fact that there's a spit curl right there. A lot of people miss that too. He's riding a bike. He's not having a carbon footprint, yet he still wears flannel like a Midwestern, homegrown boy. He's got a business jacket, but it's not like, he's not like Gucci or anything. It seems kind of formal, but down to earth as well. So even though this guy, saved Jenny, he's going back to his old self of trying to hit on Lois. So some things change, some things don't. One of the wonderful things is that, Perry White hires Clark Kent, and I liked him in these glasses. These glasses make him look pretty goofy. I like the subtle smile that she gives him. Lois Lane, welcome to the planet. Not the Daily Planet, but the planet. So it's kind of a nice wink. And both smile, they're in love, and it's a beautiful, happy ending. So there you have it. That's Man of Steel in a nutshell. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us. This is a wonderful film. If I had to give it a rating, probably 9 out of 10. What would I want it more? I don't know. Probably just a couple more scenes at the end of Lois Lane and Superman, kind of falling in love and things like that, and just happiness, just like a little nice montage of the city being rebuilt. If I had to do something extra, probably like the ending from A New Frontier, when you see like a montage. I know that Zack Snyder's really good with montages, so I would have hoped for a montage after this film. But you run the risk of inconsistencies, when you build a montage after Man of Steel, but then you haven't casted your Batman, your Wonder Woman, your Aquaman, so yeah, this is still pretty great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Zack Snyder, Warner Brothers, for allowing us fans to do this. Thank you, Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Lawrence Fishburne, Michael Shannon, Diane Lane, Russell Crowe, Kevin Costner, Antje. I don't know how to pronounce her name. She played Fiora, Colonel Hardy. Oh man, everybody really did an amazing job. Anyways, this is Sergio from DC Domingo saying up, and away. Thanks. Bye.